Las Vegas attracts people from all over the world, but some of our customers aren't quite human anymore. They come in wearing clothes from decades past, trying to pawn jewelry and watches that stopped working the day the atomic bombs were tested at the Nevada test site 60 miles away. Their skin has a strange glow under our shop lights, and they pay no attention to the Geiger counter that starts clicking frantically whenever they walk through our front door. The strangest thing about these radioactive visitors isn't that they exist. It's that they all claim to be tourists who came to Vegas for their honeymoon in 1951 and just never left. They speak about the casinos and showgirls like it's still the golden age of the Strip. And when I try to explain that it's been 70 years, they just smile with teeth that shine like uranium glass and ask if we're still buying gold at 1950s prices. My name is Danny Moretti, and 3 months ago, I thought the worst thing about working at Gold and Silver Pawn Shop on Las Vegas Boulevard was dealing with drunk tourists trying to hawk fake Rolexes. That was before my cousin Vince got arrested for running numbers out of his auto shop in Henderson, leaving me scrambling to find work that didn't require a background check. The old man who runs this place, Jake Petrov, hired me on the spot when I mentioned I could speak some Russian, apparently useful when dealing with certain clientele who frequent the back rooms. The shop sits in a strip mall between a payday loan place and a 24-hour psychic reader, close enough to the strip that we get foot traffic, but far enough away that rent won't bankrupt us. During my first week, I figured the Geiger counter mounted behind the register was some kind of joke. Maybe a prop from one of those atomic-themed restaurants that used to be popular. Jake never mentioned it during training, just showed me how to test gold with acid, spot cubic zirconia, and operate the ancient cash register that still uses actual keys. Then Mrs. Chin, no, wait, that name feels wrong. Mrs. Kowalski? No, that's not right either. The woman with the beehive hairdo and the powder blue dress walked in on my 8th day. She wanted to sell a pearl necklace that made the counter go haywire, clicking like an angry insect. When I asked Jake about it later, he pulled out a handwritten list from his desk drawer. Some rules for the night shift, he said, not looking me in the eye. Customers get strange after midnight. Follow these exactly, Danny. Your life depends on it. That's when I learned there are things in this desert that the atomic tests didn't just kill. They changed them into something else entirely. Jake's office smelled like stale cigarettes and the kind of coffee that had been sitting on the burner since morning. He pulled out a manila folder from his desk drawer, the edges worn soft from years of handling. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, the kind lawyers use, covered in his blocky handwriting. Read these tonight before your first graveyard shift, he said, sliding the paper across his desk. Don't take them lightly, kid. Lost 2 good workers already because they thought this was all some elaborate prank. I picked up the list, expecting maybe workplace safety guidelines or customer service tips. Instead, I found something that made my stomach twist. Night shift protocols. Gold and Silver Pawn. 1. Never acknowledge customers who enter wearing formal wear from before 1960. Process their transactions in complete silence. Do not make eye contact. 2. If the Geiger counter clicks faster than once per second, step away from the customer immediately. Complete the sale from behind the lead apron hanging in the storage room. 3. Any jewelry that glows visibly in normal light must be placed in the lead line box beneath Register 2. Mark the receipt, special handling in red ink. 4. Between 3:17 a.m. and 3:23 a.m., do not look toward the back corner near the vintage slot machines. Close your eyes and count to 60 if necessary. 5. If a customer asks about the old prices from when we first met, quote exactly $35 per ounce for gold, regardless of current market value. 6. Should anyone request to see items from the collection downstairs, inform them that access requires Mr. Petrov's personal approval and schedule an appointment for the following week. Jake watched me read, his weathered fingers drumming against his coffee mug, a souvenir from the flamingo with a pink bird that had mostly faded away. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, though something in his expression already told me it wasn't. "Danny, you ever hear about the Sedan crater?" He didn't wait for my answer. 1962, they detonated a 100-kiloton bomb out at the test site, trying to figure out if nukes could be used for excavation projects. Biggest hole you ever saw, over 300 feet deep and nearly 1,300 feet across. I nodded, vaguely remembering something from high school history class. "What they didn't put in the textbooks," Jay continued, "is that some of the folks who got caught in the fallout zones didn't just get sick and die. Some of them got stuck, trapped between what they were and what the radiation was trying to turn them into. They keep coming back to Vegas because it's the last place they remember being fully human." "That's insane." "Is it? You've been here over a week now. You've seen the Geiger counter go off. You telling me you haven't noticed anything strange about some of our late-night customers?" I thought about the woman in the powder blue dress, how her makeup seemed painted on rather than applied, the way she moved like she was walking underwater. Her pearl necklace had made that clicking sound stop completely when I'd held it, as if the radiation was being absorbed somehow. "They're harmless mostly," Jake said, "as long as you follow the rules. But they get upset when things don't match their memories of how Vegas used to be. Keep them calm. Keep them happy, and everyone goes home safe." The bell above the front door chimed, and Jake glanced at his watch. "Speaking of which, looks like you're about to get some practice. Remember, silence and respect." I folded the rules and slipped them into my back pocket, then walked out to the main floor. A man stood near our display of vintage watches, wearing a sharp black suit with wide lapels and a thin tie. His hair was slicked back, with what looked like enough pomade to grease a car engine. When he turned toward me, I noticed his skin had a faint luminescence, like those old watch dials that used radium paint. The Geiger counter started its rapid clicking. He placed a gold wedding ring on the counter, the metal still warm to the touch. "My wife and I are heading back to the Sahara for our anniversary show," he said, his voice carrying a slight echo. "We need some quick cash for the slots." The Sahara Hotel had been demolished in 2011. I remembered rule number 1 and nodded without speaking, then walked to the storage room for the lead apron. Through the thin walls, I could hear him humming Volare, the same song Bean Martin used to perform at the Copa Room, back when the Rat Pack owned this town. When I returned, properly protected, he was examining his reflection in the chrome coffee pot we kept near the register. His reflection looked normal, but his actual face seemed slightly out of focus, like an old television trying to tune in a distant station. The man in the black suit waited patiently, while I processed his wedding ring, the lead apron heavy against my chest. Up close, I could see that his tie clip was shaped like a mushroom cloud, the kind of tasteless souvenir they used to sell at gift shops near the test site. The ring itself felt warm, almost feverish, and when I placed it on the scale, the numbers flickered erratically before settling. Following Jake's rule about 1950s pricing, I quoted him $35 per ounce. He smiled, revealing teeth that seemed to capture and hold light like tiny mirrors. "Generous," he said, though his lips didn't quite match the timing of his words. "The Sahara's nickel slots have been calling our names all week." I counted out the cash, keeping my eyes focused on the bills rather than his face. When he reached for the money, his fingers passed through mine for just a moment, cold as morning desert air, before solidifying again. He pocketed the cash, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. "Give my regards to Sinatra when you see him," he said over his shoulder, and then he was gone, leaving only the faintest scent of ozone and Old Spice. The Geiger counter settled back to its normal lazy clicking. Jake emerged from his office, car keys in hand. "You handled that well." "I'm heading home. Call if you need anything, but don't call unless someone's bleeding or the building's on fire." He paused at the door. "And Danny?" "Trust the rules. They're the only thing keeping this place from becoming a crater like the rest of the test sites." The hours crawled by. I occupied myself restocking displays and learning the inventory system, trying not to think about the man's fingers passing through mine. Around midnight, a group of college kids stumbled in, reeking of cheap beer and marijuana, looking to pawn their textbooks for gambling money. Normal customers felt like a relief after everything else. At 1:47 a.m. she walked in. The woman wore a wedding dress that must have cost a fortune in 1953. Layers of silk and lace with a train that swept the floor behind her. Her veil was pinned with orange blossoms that looked fresh picked, despite the fact that orange trees don't bloom in November. She carried a small velvet box in her gloved hands. The Geiger counter accelerated to a rapid staccato beat. I reached for the lead apron, but she was already at the counter, opening the box to reveal a diamond engagement ring that glowed with its own inner light, not the sparkle of a well-cut stone catching fluorescent bulbs. This was something else entirely, a phosphorescence that made my eyes water. "I need to sell this," she said, her voice carrying that same underwater quality as the man in the suit. "Our honeymoon's been extended, and we're running low on spending money." Rule number 3 echoed in my mind. Any jewelry that glows visibly in normal light must go in the lead-lined box. I opened the compartment beneath Register 2, grateful that Jake had shown me where everything was located. "Beautiful piece," I managed, using tweezers to lift the ring rather than touching it directly. The moment it settled into the lead box, the glow died completely, and the Geiger counter's clicking slowed to normal. "We got engaged at the Atomic View Motel," she continued, apparently oblivious to my handling of her ring. "Such a romantic spot to watch the morning tests. The sunrise over the mountains, the flash of light, the mushroom clouds rising like prayers into heaven." The Atomic View Motel had been demolished in 1987, but I wasn't about to correct her. I quoted the standard 1950s gold price, added an estimate for the diamond based on what little I could judge from my brief glimpse. She accepted the offer without negotiating, unusual for any pawnshop transaction. As I counted out her money, she lifted her veil slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her face. What I saw made my hand freeze halfway to the cash drawer. Her features shifted constantly, like television static trying to resolve into a clear picture. One moment she had brown eyes, the next blue, then green. Her nose changed shape, her cheekbones moved, her skin tone fluctuated between pale and olive. "Is something wrong?" she asked, and now her voice sounded like multiple women speaking in unison. I forced myself to finish counting the bills, sliding them across the counter without looking up again, just making sure I have the right denominations. She gathered the money, tucked it into a small purse that matched her gloves, and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned back. "You're very kind. Most places won't do business with our sort anymore." She paused, tilting her head. "You remind me of my brother. He worked at one of the observation posts during the tests. Such a dedicated young man." The bell chimed as she left, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. 3:15 a.m. found me organizing the watch display, trying to stay busy as the 6-minute window approached. I'd read rule number 4 at least a dozen times, memorizing every word. Between 317 and 323, don't look toward the back corner near the vintage slot machines. At exactly 316, I positioned myself behind the counter, facing away from that corner, and started counting. The seconds felt elastic, stretching like warm taffy. At 317, I closed my eyes. That's when the sound started. Coins dropping into metal trays. The mechanical whir of spinning reels. The electronic beeping of a jackpot. Laughter and conversation in languages I didn't recognize, mixed with English spoken in accents from decades past. Someone was playing the slots, lots of someones, but I kept my eyes shut tight and continued counting. 61, 62, 63. A woman's voice, clear as crystal. "Frank, honey, come see." I hit the sevens. 98, 99, 100. The sound stopped abruptly at 323, leaving only the normal hum of refrigeration units and air conditioning. I opened my eyes, turned around slowly, and looked toward the back corner. The vintage slot machines sat silent and dark, just as they had all evening. But scattered on the floor around them were coins. Silver dollars with dates from the 1950s, their surfaces tarnished black with age. I left them where they lay and didn't mention them in my shift report. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. The silver dollars remained on the floor when I arrived for my third night shift. Jake had left a note on the register. "Don't touch the coins. They'll disappear on their own by morning." Attached was a $20 bill with hazard pay written in his blocky handwriting. By 11 p.m., I'd developed a routine. Check the Geiger counter's battery. Ensure the lead apron hung accessible in the storage room. Verify the lead-lined box beneath Register 2 was empty and ready. Position myself to avoid accidentally glancing toward the slot machine corner during the danger window. The rules no longer felt like suggestions. They felt like survival instructions. Around midnight, an elderly man shuffled in wearing a perfectly pressed khaki uniform with Nevada test site patches on both shoulders. His name tag read, Morrison, R, Security, in faded lettering. Unlike the other customers, he didn't trigger the Geiger counter at all. "Evening, son," he said, approaching the counter with a manila envelope clutched in weathered hands. "I've got something special here. Real collector's items." He opened the envelope and spread out a dozen photographs across the glass counter. Black and white images of mushroom clouds rising over the desert, taken from various distances and angles. Each photo was signed and dated, spanning from 1951 to 1962. "I was there for every test," Morrison explained, his voice steady and clear. "Buster Jangle, Tumbler Snapper, Operation Plum Bob. Documented them all. These are the only complete set of signed witness photographs in existence." I studied the images, noting the precise handwriting on each one. They looked authentic, and I knew collectors paid premium prices for atomic test memorabilia. "What are you looking to get for them?" "Well, that depends," Morrison said, leaning forward slightly. "What are you paying for gold these days?" "Same rates as when we first met." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Rule number 5. He was asking about the old prices from when we first met, which meant I needed to quote exactly $35 per ounce, regardless of current market value. But these weren't gold items. They were photographs. Was the rule meant to be taken literally? Or was this some kind of test? Morrison watched my face, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Something wrong, son? You look confused. I made a decision. For gold, we're paying $35 per ounce. Same as always. I gestured toward the photographs. But these are collectibles. Different pricing structure. His smile widened. Smart boy. Jake trained you well. He gathered up the photos and slid them back into the envelope. I'm not here to sell tonight. Just checking to make sure you remember the important details. You know Jake? Known him for years. He used to work security at the test site before opening this place. That's where he learned about our special clientele. Morrison tucked the envelope under his arm. The rules aren't arbitrary, son. They're based on real experience with real consequences. Jake learned them the hard way. Before I could ask what he meant, Morrison headed for the door. Keep following them, exactly as written. Your predecessor didn't, and we had to close the shop for 2 weeks while Jake dealt with the aftermath. He left me alone with more questions than answers. The next customer arrived around 2 a.m. A woman in her 40s, wearing a business suit that looked expensive but somehow dated. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. I need to speak with Jake Petrov, she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. I have an appointment to view items from the collection downstairs. Rule number 6. Access to whatever was downstairs required Jake's personal approval, and I was supposed to schedule appointments for the following week. Mr. Petrov isn't available tonight, I said, reaching for the appointment book. I can schedule you for next week. You don't understand, she interrupted, her voice taking on an edge. I've been coming here for 30 years. Jake knows me. I need to see the collection tonight. Something about her tone made me hesitate. This felt different from the other customers, less supernatural, more demanding, but the rules were clear. I'm sorry, but Mr. Petrov requires all collection viewings to be scheduled in advance. I can put you down for Tuesday evening if that works. Her expression hardened. Young man, do you have any idea who you're talking to? I represent certain interests in this city that predate your birth. That collection downstairs contains items that legally belong to my clients. I understand you're frustrated, but no, you don't understand. She leaned across the counter, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something else. Ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. Those items were removed from federal property without authorization. My clients have been very patient, but that patience has limits. The Geiger counter started clicking, slowly at first, then picking up speed. This woman wasn't one of the radiation-changed customers from the 1950s. She was something else entirely. Jake's policies are non-negotiable, I said, backing toward the storage room. I can schedule an appointment, or you can come back during regular business hours to speak with him directly. She studied me for a long moment, then reached into her purse and placed a business card on the counter. It was completely black, except for a phone number embossed in silver. Tell Jake that Agent Sarah Chen stopped by. Tell him the Department of Energy is requesting access to the Saddam collection for final inventory and disposal. My throat went dry. Sarah Chen, one of the names Jake had told me to avoid using. But here she was, real and standing in front of me. I'll make sure he gets the message, I managed. She pocketed her card and headed for the exit, but stopped at the door. Danny Moretti, isn't it? From Henderson? Your cousin Vince sends his regards from federal custody. The door chimed as she left, and the Geiger counter's clicking faded to normal. But my hands were shaking as I wrote her message in the appointment book. How did she know about Vince? How did she know my name? I pulled out my phone to call Jake, then stopped. He'd specifically said not to call unless someone was bleeding or the building was on fire. Agent Chem hadn't threatened violence. She'd just been ominous as hell. The appointment book entry looked wrong somehow, so I tore out the page and rewrote it more clearly. When I finished, I noticed something strange. The torn page hadn't gone in the trash. It had simply vanished, leaving no trace that Agent Chen had ever been here. 3:15 a.m. approached faster than usual. I positioned myself facing away from the slot machine corner, closed my eyes at 3:17, and began counting. Tonight the sounds were different. Not the cheerful casino noises from before, but something that made my skin crawl. Whispers in languages that hurt to hear, the scrape of metal on concrete, electrical humming that seemed to come from inside my own skull. At 3:23, silence returned. When I turned around, the silver dollars from previous nights had indeed vanished, but new ones had appeared. These were darker, almost black, and when I looked closely, I could see they were melted and warped, as if they'd been exposed to intense heat. I left them alone and tried not to think about what Agent Chen had said about a sedan collection downstairs. Whatever Jake was keeping in this building's basement, it was significant enough to attract federal attention. My shift ended at 6 a.m. with sunrise painting the desert mountains gold and orange. Jake arrived early, took one look at my face, and poured himself a double shot of bourbon from the bottle he kept behind the register. "Tell me," he said. Jake's face went ashen when I mentioned Agent Chen's visit. He set down his bourbon without taking a sip and walked to the front door, flipping the deadbolt and pulling down the metal security grate. "We're closed today," he said, more to himself than to me. "Danny, I need you to listen carefully. That woman isn't just federal government. She's part of a cleanup crew that's been hunting down artifacts from the atomic tests for decades." He walked to a framed photograph hanging behind the register, a black and white image of the original pawn shop from 1963. Behind the glass, I could see it was actually hiding a wall safe. Jake's fingers worked the combination with practiced speed. The sedan test in 1962 wasn't just about excavation, he said, pulling out a thick folder marked with radiation warning symbols. They were trying to create controlled conditions for studying what happened to organic matter exposed to specific isotope combinations. Problem was, some of the volunteers who got dosed didn't die the way they expected. He spread out medical records, photographs, and official documents stamped with government seals. The pictures showed people in various stages of what looked like physical transformation. Skin that seemed to phase in and out of focus. Limbs that appeared to exist in multiple positions simultaneously. "The lucky ones became what you've been serving," Jake continued. "Stuck in time loops, harmless mostly, just trying to relive their last normal moments. But others..." He pulled out a photograph that made my stomach lurch. Others became something else entirely. The image showed a figure in a hospital gown, but its body seemed to shift between solid and transparent, with additional limbs emerging and disappearing like a stop-motion animation gone wrong. The timestamp indicated it was taken 3 days after the sedan test. "This is why we have the rules, Danny. The basement houses 17 subjects who were too dangerous for the government facilities, but too human to simply eliminate. We keep them stable, keep them fed, and most importantly, keep them contained." Fed. My mouth felt dry as cotton. The glowing jewelry, the irradiated coins, that's their sustenance. They absorb radiation like we eat food. Your job isn't just customer service, kid. You're collecting their meals. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Every transaction with the 1950s customers had been feeding something hungry in the basement of this building. "Agent Chen wants them back," Jake continued, "but not for humanitarian reasons. The DOE has been developing weapons based on their unique properties. turn people into living radiation bombs, essentially. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp raps. Pause. 3 more raps. Jake's expression grew even more grim. "That's not a customer pattern," he muttered, peering through the security grate. "Danny, get to the basement, now." "What? Why?" "Because if Chem brought backup, they'll storm this place in about 60 seconds, and you need to make sure our residents stay calm. Last time they got agitated, we had to evacuate 6 city blocks." Jake handed me a keyring and pointed toward a door I'd never noticed before, hidden behind a display of vintage guitars. "Red key opens the main level. Blue key is for emergencies only. Do not, under any circumstances, use the blue key unless you hear my voice telling you it's safe to come up." The knocking resumed, more insistent this time. I stumbled toward the hidden door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the red key. The lock turned with surprising ease, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. Industrial-grade ventilation fans hummed somewhere below, and the air carried the sharp scent of ozone mixed with something medical, antiseptic, and fear. The stairs ended in a corridor lined with thick glass windows, each looking into what resembled hospital rooms. 17 rooms, just as Jake had said. Most appeared empty at first glance, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, I began to make out shapes moving within. In room 3, a woman in a faded floral dress sat in a rocking chair, her form flickering like a television with poor reception. She turned toward my footsteps, and I saw her face cycle through at least a dozen different appearances before settling on one that looked almost normal. Room 7 housed a man whose body seemed to exist in multiple time states simultaneously. I could see him standing, sitting, and lying down all at once, creating a confusing overlap of positions that made my eyes water. The woman from room 3 tapped on her glass window, her knuckles making no sound. When I approached, she mouthed words I couldn't hear, but her expression was desperate, pleading. Above us, I heard muffled voices, Jake talking to someone, then other voices responding in clipped official tones. Agent Chen had brought friends. A pneumatic hiss drew my attention to the end of the corridor, where a large steel door marked "Control Room" had opened automatically. Inside, banks of monitors showed feeds from security cameras throughout the pawn shop. Jake stood at the counter with 3 people in dark suits, their faces obscured by the camera angle. One monitor displayed radiation readings from each basement room. Most showed steady, moderate levels, but room 12 was spiking erratically. On its camera feed, something large and shapeless writhed against the walls, leaving streaks of luminescent fluid across the glass. An intercom crackled to life. "Danny, can you hear me?" Jake's voice, strained but controlled. I found a microphone and pressed the transmit button. "I'm here. What's happening up there?" "Our friends want to inspect the collection." I'm trying to explain that disturbing them isn't advisable, but they're not interested in safety protocols. On the monitors, I watched Agent Chen gesture toward the basement door. The 2 men with her moved with military precision, checking equipment that looked suspiciously like weapons. "Jake, room 12 is showing high readings." "I know. That's subject 12. He gets agitated when strangers are nearby. Whatever you do, don't open his room unless I specifically tell you to." Subject 12. Not a name, just a number. I looked at the camera feed again and realized the shapeless mass wasn't just moving randomly. It was forming letters against the glass, spelling out the same word over and over. H-E-L-P. Agent Chen's voice echoed through the intercom system. "Mr. Petrov, we're coming downstairs now. Please instruct your employee to unlock all containment units." "That's not happening," Jake replied firmly. "Mr. Petrov, I have a federal warrant authorizing the seizure of all materials related to Operation Sedan. Your cooperation is no longer optional." I watched on the monitors as one of the suited men produced what looked like a military-grade battering ram. They were planning to force their way down here, federal warrant or no federal warrant. The woman in room 3 was tapping more frantically now, her face cycling through expressions of terror. In room 7, the time-shifted man's multiple positions began moving more rapidly, creating a blurred effect that made the air around him seem to vibrate. All down the corridor, the other subjects were beginning to respond to the stress. Lights flickered inside their rooms, and several monitors showed radiation spikes as their emotional states destabilized. "Danny," Jake's voice through the intercom, "urgent now. They're coming down. Keep everyone calm, and whatever happens, do not let them remove any of the subjects from their rooms. These people spent 60 years trapped in radiation-induced time loops. Sudden changes in environment could cause them to." He paused. "Well, let's just say it would be very, very bad for Las Vegas." On the monitor, I watched Agent Chen and her team disappear from the main floor cameras. Moments later, I could hear their footsteps on the basement stairs. The blue key felt heavy in my palm. Jake had said only to use it in emergencies, but he hadn't explained what it actually did. Looking down the corridor at 17 rooms full of people who'd been experimented on, abandoned and forgotten by their own government, I had a feeling I was about to find out. Agent Chen appeared at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by 2 men whose equipment bags bore Department of Energy logos. Her smile was predatory as she surveyed the corridor of containment rooms. "Impressive setup, Mr. Petrov," she called into the intercom. "Though I suspect this facility hasn't undergone proper federal inspection in quite some time." Through the control room monitors, I watched Jake's face as he responded. "These people volunteered for atomic testing in good faith. The government abandoned them when the results got inconvenient. These aren't people anymore," Agent Chen replied, approaching the first containment window. "They're valuable research assets that belong to the United States Department of Energy." The woman in room 3 pressed both palms against the glass as Chen peered in. Her face was cycling through appearances more rapidly now. Young, old, different ethnicities, even different genders. As if her identity was unraveling under stress. "Fascinating," Chen murmured, making notes on a tablet. "Subject exhibits temporal displacement characteristics, consistent with theoretical models. We'll need full extraction protocols." One of her companions, a tall man with military bearing, began setting up what looked like a portable containment unit, complete with lead lining and radiation shielding. The other pulled out a device that resembled a cross between a camel prod and a ray gun. "Ma'am," the military man said, "radiation readings are spiking in multiple rooms. The subjects appear to be responding to our presence." "Expected behavior," Chen replied dismissively. "Proceed with extraction sequence. We'll start with the most stable subjects and work our way up to the challenging ones." On the monitors, I watched them approach room 7, where the time-shifted man existed in multiple positions simultaneously. The moment they began working on the door lock, his overlapping forms started moving in frantic, erratic patterns. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the basement corridor. An automated voice echoed from hidden speakers. "Containment breach imminent. Evacuation recommended. Containment breach imminent." "Jake," I whispered into the microphone. "They're opening the rooms. Danny, listen to me very carefully." His voice came through strained with urgency. "Those subjects have been stable because they're in controlled environments, matched to their specific radiation exposure. Remove them from those rooms, and their molecular structures will destabilize. What does that mean? It means they'll release every bit of radiation they've absorbed over 60 years all at once, like human-shaped atomic bombs. Agent Chen had moved to room 12, where Subject 12 continued spelling out HELP against the glass. She studied the shapeless, writhing mass with clinical interest. "This one shows the most advanced transformation," she said to her team. "Priority extraction. The weapon's applications are obvious." The tall agent began working on room 12's lock mechanism with some kind of electronic override device. Subject 12's movements became increasingly agitated, leaving longer streaks of glowing fluid across the walls. Throughout the corridor, other subjects were reacting to the disturbance. The woman in room 3 was now changing appearances so rapidly, she looked like a flickering strobe light. In room 7, the time-shifted man's multiple positions were blurring together into something that hurt to look at. "Ma'am, we're getting massive radiation spikes," the second agent reported, his instrument readings climbing into dangerous territory. "Acceptable risk," Chen replied. "Continue extraction procedures." The lock on room 12 clicked open. The moment the seal broke, Subject 12's form expanded violently, no longer constrained by the small space. What emerged wasn't human in any recognizable sense. It was a constantly shifting mass of flesh and energy. It seemed to exist partially in this dimension, and partially somewhere else entirely. The Geiger counter in the control room started clicking so rapidly, it sounded like static. "Abort extraction!" the tall agent shouted, backing away from the open room. "Radiation levels are off the charts." But it was too late. Subject 12 flowed out of the containment room like liquid fire, and where it touched the walls, the concrete began to glow and crack. The automated warning system shifted to a new message. Critical containment failure. Facility evacuation mandatory. Critical containment failure. I grabbed the blue key, my hand slick with sweat. Whatever it controlled, Jake had saved it for exactly this kind of emergency. On the monitors, I watched Agent Chen stumble backward as Subject 12 expanded to fill half the corridor. The other containment rooms were beginning to fail now, their seals compromised by the massive radiation leak from room 12. The woman from room 3 stepped through her dissolving door, her rapidly changing faces all wearing the same expression of confused terror. The time-shifted man emerged as a blur of overlapping positions, leaving after-images that lingered in the air like burned shadows on a wall. "Jake, they're all getting out," I shouted into the microphone. "Use the blue key, Danny. Now!" I found the blue key's lock on the control panel, a heavy switch protected by a clear plastic cover labeled Emergency Containment Protocol, Authorize Only. I flipped up the cover and turned the key. Every monitor in the control room went red. New warning lights activated throughout the basement, and a different automated voice began speaking. Emergency Containment Protocol activated. Building lockdown initiated. Emergency Containment Protocol activated. Heavy blast doors began descending from the ceiling at both ends of the corridor, sealing Agent Chen and her team in with the escaped subjects. But that wasn't all. I could hear similar doors slamming shut throughout the building above us. "What did I just do?" I whispered. Jake's voice through the intercom, grim but resigned. "You activated the Sedan Protocol. The building is now sealed from the outside world until the radiation levels return to safe parameters. How long will that take? For normal radioactive materials? Hours, maybe days." He paused. "For what we're dealing with? Could be weeks, maybe longer." On the monitors, I watched the nightmare unfolding in the corridor. Subject 12 had grown to enormous proportions, its shifting mass pulsing with internal light. Agent Chen was shouting orders. but her team's equipment was failing in the intense radiation field. The woman from room 3 approached Chen, her face finally stabilizing into a single appearance, that of a young bride from the 1950s, complete with tear-streaked makeup. "You promised we could go home after the tests," she said, her voice somehow audible through the intercom system. "You said it would only take a few weeks, and then we could start our families." Agent Chen raised her ray gun device, but when she pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The electronics had been fried by the radiation. Other subjects were emerging from their failing containment rooms now. Some looked almost human. Others were barely recognizable as having once been people. All of them were approaching the federal agents with expressions of long-suppressed anger. "They remember," Jake's voice through the intercom, "60 years of containment, and they remember every promise that was broken." The tall agent tried to reach the blast door, but Subject 12's expanded form blocked the entire corridor. When he attempted to push through, his hand passed right into the shifting mass, and when he pulled it back, the flesh was glowing with the same phosphorescence. "Danny," Jake continued, "the protocol will hold them down there, but it won't hold forever. Eventually, either the radiation will dissipate enough for them to be contained again, or what? Or they'll absorb enough energy to breach even the emergency containment. And then Las Vegas has about 6 hours before the fallout reaches California." On the monitor, I watched Agent Chen backing against the far wall as the subjects closed in around her. Her clinical confidence had evaporated, replaced by the same terror their victims had felt 60 years ago when they'd volunteered for atomic testing and never returned home. The woman in the wedding dress was speaking to Chen now, her voice carrying decades of accumulated grief. "We trusted you. We believed in serving our country. We left our families, our futures, everything we loved because you said it was important." Subject 12 pulsed brighter, and I realized it wasn't just random movement. It was trying to communicate, spelling out words across its shifting surface. "Promised. Home ... lied. 60 years." The military agent collapsed, radiation poisoning setting in rapidly. The second agent was trying to use his equipment to contact the surface, but all communications were dead. The emergency protocol had cut all connections to prevent information about the breach from reaching the outside world. Agent Chen's tablet had cracked, its screen showing nothing but static. She looked directly into one of the security cameras, her composure finally breaking. "Open the doors," she pleaded. "We'll abort the mission. We'll leave them alone." But the subjects had surrounded her completely now, and their combined radiation output was climbing toward critical levels. The concrete walls were beginning to crack and glow, structural integrity failing under the intense energy bombardment. "Jake," I said into the microphone, "what happens if the basement can't contain them?" "Then we find out whether the Sedan protocol's final failsafe works as designed." "Jake, what's the final failsafe?" I demanded into the microphone, watching the monitors as the basement corridor filled with increasing levels of deadly radiation. His response came after a long pause. "The building sits on top of an old mine shaft that connects to a natural underground river system. If the containment breach reaches critical mass, explosive charges will flood the entire basement complex. Flood it with water? With concrete. Liquid concrete mixed with lead particles. It'll entomb everything down there permanently." Jake's voice carried the weight of someone who'd hoped never to use such knowledge. "Danny, the failsafe is automatic. If radiation levels hit 10,000 roentgens per hour, the charges detonate. We're currently at 8,000 and climbing." On the monitors, Subject 12 had grown so large it pressed against the corridor ceiling, its shifting form now incorporating pieces of the concrete walls. Where its surface touched the overhead pipes, Metal began to dissolve and reform into organic-looking growths that pulsed with their own light. Agent Chen was pressed against the far wall with her surviving companion, the tall military agent having collapsed from acute radiation exposure. His body was beginning to exhibit the same phase-shifting properties as the original subjects, skin flickering between solid and translucent, limbs appearing to move independently of conscious control. "Please," Chen whispered to the woman in the wedding dress, who stood closest to her. "We can negotiate. There are facilities, better facilities, where you could be comfortable." The bride laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Comfortable? We've been your laboratory animals for 60 years. Do you know what it's like to exist in 17 different time states simultaneously? To remember dying in the flash, but never actually dying?" Other subjects gathered around Chen and her remaining agent. A man in a casino dealer's vest from the 1950s still wore his name tag, "Hello, I'm Jerry, Sahara Hotel." His face maintained human features, but his hands had become something else entirely. Appendages that seemed to reach through space itself to touch objects several feet away. "We volunteered because we loved our country," Jerry said, his voice echoing from multiple points in the corridor simultaneously. "Left our jobs, our families, our whole lives behind, because some government scientist promised we were helping America stay safe." "You were?" Chen insisted desperately. "The atomic program." "The atomic program used us as test subjects for biological weapons," interrupted another voice. This came from a teenage boy whose body existed as a series of overlapping photographs, each showing him at a different stage of decomposition and regeneration. "We found the files, Agent Chen. We know what really happened at Sedan." Through the intercom, Jake's voice was grim. "Danny, radiation just hit 9,000. You need to get to the surface level now. The blast doors will protect you from the concrete flood, but not from the radiation if those walls give way." I looked at the monitors one more time. Agent Chen's remaining companion had stopped moving entirely, his body now cycling through the same phase-shifting patterns as the subjects. But instead of looking confused or afraid like the original victims, his expression held pure malice. "That's not good," I muttered. "Jake, the government agent just transformed, but he's different from the others." "Different how?" "The original subjects look lost, confused. This guy looks like he wants to hurt someone." On the screen, the transformed agent stood up slowly, his form more stable than the others, but somehow more menacing. Unlike the subjects who'd been trapped in 1950s time loops, this one retained full awareness of the present day and 60 years of government cover-ups. "Agent Chen," the transformed man said, his voice carrying new harmonics that made the speakers crackle. "I've just experienced what you put these people through. Every second of agony, every moment of confused terror, every day of wondering if their families remember them." Chen scrambled along the wall, trying to distance herself from her former companion. "Thompson, you need to fight the transformation. Your training." "My training taught me to follow orders without question," Thompson replied, his form beginning to expand like Subject 12 had done. "But now I can see the classified files burned into my DNA. I know what Project Sedan was really about." The radiation alarm in the control room shifted to a new pitch. We'd crossed 9,500 Roentgens. Whatever Jake's automatic failsafe was set for, we were approaching it rapidly. Jerry, the casino dealer, walked over to one of the security cameras and looked directly into it. "Is someone up there listening? Someone who works here?" I pressed the transmit button. I'm here. My name's Danny. Danny, how long have you been feeding us? The question caught me off guard. Feeding you? The glowing jewelry, the irradiated coins. Every night, someone collects radioactive materials and brings them down here. That's how we've stayed stable all these years. I realized he was right. Every strange transaction, every piece of glowing jewelry I'd placed in the lead-lined box, it had all been food for the subjects in the basement. A few weeks, I admitted. I didn't know what I was doing. You were keeping us alive, said the woman in the wedding dress, preventing us from fading away completely or exploding from starvation. Jake never told you, did he? He said you absorbed radiation like food. More than that, Jerry explained. Without regular feeding, we destabilize. Too little radiation, and we phase out of existence entirely. Too much at once, and we become walking atomic bombs. The pawn shop operation was designed to provide exactly the right amount to keep us in equilibrium. On another monitor, I watched Subject 12 pulse brighter. Words formed across its surface. System failing, hungry, angry, 60 years. Agent Thompson had grown to nearly half the size of Subject 12, his transformed body incorporating pieces of the surveillance equipment and wall fixtures. Unlike the original subjects, his consciousness seemed fully intact and focused on revenge. Chen, Thompson said, you're going to experience exactly what these people went through. But first, you're going to tell them the truth about why they were really chosen for the tests. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie. The files are part of me now. I can see them. Thompson's form shifted, and suddenly the concrete wall behind him displayed images like a movie screen. Government documents, photographs, medical records. Show them, Chin. Show them why they were selected. The documents scrolled past faster than I could read, but certain phrases stood out. Terminal patients. Expendable subjects. Psychological profiles indicate no family connections. Volunteers unlikely to be missed if program extends beyond projected timeline. The woman in the wedding dress stepped closer to Chen, her face cycling through emotions rather than appearances now. Confusion, realization, rage. We weren't random volunteers, she whispered. You chose us because you thought nobody would come looking. The program required subjects with specific characteristics, Chen said weakly. You mean people's society had already forgotten, Jerry added, his multiple voices overlapping with anger. Cancer patients, orphans, drifters, people whose disappearance wouldn't raise questions. The radiation alarm reached its highest pitch, 10,000 rumpkins per hour. Jake's voice crackled through the intercom one last time. Danny, get to the main floor now. The charges are about to... The control room monitors went dead. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. Somewhere deep below, I heard the rumble of massive explosions, followed by the roar of liquid concrete pouring into the basement complex. The building shook violently, and I grabbed the stair railing as the entire structure seemed to settle several inches. From below came a sound like screaming, but muffled and distorted, as if coming from underwater. Then silence. I climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, emerging into the main pawn shop, where Jake stood looking decades older than he had an hour ago. The Geiger counter behind the register was clicking rapidly but steadily, elevated radiation, but not lethal levels. Is it over? I asked. Jake walked to the window and peered through the security grate. In the distance, emergency vehicles were racing toward our location, their sirens wailing across the desert morning. The immediate crisis is contained, he said quietly. But Danny, there are 12 other facilities like this one scattered across Nevada. And now the federal government knows we've been hiding atomic test survivors for 60 years. He turned to face me, his expression haunted. Agent Chen was just the advanced scout. They'll be back with more resources, more people, and they won't make the same mistakes twice. Outside, the first of the emergency vehicles pulled into our parking lot. Through the tinted windows, I could see figures in hazmat suits preparing equipment that looked disturbingly familiar to what Agent Chen's team had brought. The hazmat-suited figures moved with military precision, establishing a perimeter around our building while more vehicles arrived. Jake pulled me away from the window as searchlights swept across the shop's exterior. "They're not emergency responders," he said, reaching behind the register to retrieve a go bag I'd never noticed before. "Real EMTs don't bring that kind of equipment." Through gaps in the security grate, I could see the new arrivals setting up sophisticated monitoring devices. The same type of radiation detection gear Agent Chen's team had carried. One figure was directing others toward what looked like a mobile command center disguised as an ambulance. "Jake, how long before they figure out what happened down there?" "They already know." He pulled out an old flip phone and began dialing. Chen's team had tracking devices, communication equipment. The moment their signals went dead, backup protocols kicked in. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Jake spoke in rapid Russian, too fast for me to follow with my limited vocabulary. After a brief conversation, he hung up and grabbed a set of car keys from the drawer. "We need to leave. Now." "What about the shop? What about the other facilities you mentioned?" "Danny, there are things you don't understand about how deep this goes. The 12 Nevada facilities are just the beginning. Project Sedan created over 300 survivors across 6 states. Most are contained, but some." He trailed off, looking toward the basement door. "Some escaped decades ago and have been living among us." A loudspeaker crackled outside. "Occupants of Gold and Silver Pawn, this is the Department of Energy Crisis Response Team. We need you to exit the building immediately for mandatory decontamination procedures." Jake snorted. "Decontamination? Right." He shouldered his bag and headed for the rear exit. "Danny, those people aren't here to help. They're here to clean up a security breach, and that includes anyone who knows what really happened." As we moved through the back storage area, I heard the front door's security grate being cut with industrial tools. Whatever polite fiction they were maintaining about emergency response had lasted about 5 minutes. "Wait," I said, stopping near a rack of vintage electronics. "If there are survivors living among regular people, how do we know who they are? How do we know we haven't been serving some of them without realizing it?" Jake paused at the rear door, his hand on the deadbolt. "Think about it, Danny. Every night shift, we had customers who paid an exact change from decades past, who spoke about Vegas like it was still 1951, who set off the Geiger counter. Those were the contained ones from other facilities. No, those were the free ones, the ones who escaped containment years ago and have been trying to live normal lives." His expression grew haunted. "We weren't just feeding the basement subjects, kid. We were feeding an entire community of atomic test survivors who've been hiding in plain sight across Las Vegas." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday to pawn her husband's old watches. Mr. Valdez, who always paid for everything in silver dollars from the 1950s. The young man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Rat Pack poster and always asked about gold prices from the old days. They weren't stuck in time loops. They were survivors trying to maintain their humanity by clinging to memories of when they were fully human. Heavy footsteps echoed through the main shop. The government team had breached the front entrance and would reach us within minutes. Jake unlocked the rear door, revealing a narrow alley behind the strip mall. His ancient Honda Accord sat waiting, engine running. Someone else was behind the wheel, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes who looked disturbingly familiar. "Danny, meet Patricia Morrison," Jake said, climbing into the passenger seat. "She's been helping coordinate the survivor community for 30 years. Morrison, like the security guard who'd tested my knowledge of the rules. I slid into the back seat as Patricia pulled away from the building. "You're related to the man who came in with the atomic test photographs," I said. "My husband. He was one of the lucky ones, exposed to radiation but not transformed. We've been documenting what happened to the others, building a support network, trying to keep everyone fed and stable." Patricia navigated through early morning Las Vegas traffic with practiced ease. Jake's operation was crucial to that effort. Jake turned in his seat to face me. "The pawn shop is blown now. They'll seal the building, remove any evidence, and probably demolish it within a week. But Danny, there are 17 other survivors who were depending on us for their radiation supplements." Through the rear window, I could see smoke rising from the direction we'd just left. Either the government team was burning evidence or something had gone wrong with their containment procedures. What happens to them if they don't get fed regularly? "Some will fade away completely," Patricia explained, turning onto a residential street lined with small stucco houses. "Others will destabilize and release all their stored energy at once. Either way, Las Vegas has a problem." We pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch house that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. The lawn was meticulously maintained, the windows were covered with heavy curtains, and I noticed the mailbox was painted with a faded radiation warning symbol. "This is a safe house," Jake said, leading me toward the front door, one of several scattered around the city. Patricia and her network have been preparing for this day for decades. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Furniture from the 1950s, appliances that belonged in a museum. Even the wallpaper looked authentic to the atomic age. But more striking were the people. A dozen men and women sat in the living room, all wearing clothes from 60 to 70 years past. Some looked completely normal. Others showed subtle signs of their transformation. Skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim lighting, hair that moved as if underwater, eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "These are the stable survivors," Patricia explained. "The ones who learned to control their transformations instead of being controlled by them." A woman in a 1950s house dress looked up from her knitting, needles clicking in perfect rhythm. "Is it true about the pawn shop? About the basement facility being compromised?" Jake nodded grimly. "Agent Chen found us. They breached containment trying to extract the subjects for weapons research." The room fell silent except for the ticking of multiple analog clocks on the walls. Finally, an elderly man in a cardigan spoke up. "Then it's time for the Phoenix Protocol." "Phoenix Protocol?" I asked. Patricia sat down heavily in a chair that matched the rest of the mid-century decor. "We've always known this day would come, when the government found us, when they tried to weaponize our people again. Phoenix Protocol is our contingency plan, which is we disappear. All of us. The entire survivor community vanishes from Las Vegas and establishes new lives somewhere the government can't find us." She looked around the room at faces that had seen too much history. "We've been preparing new identities, new locations, new support networks for 30 years. Jake pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. Inside were identity documents, driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, all bearing my photograph but a different name. Daniel Martinez, born in Tucson, Arizona, 1995. Danny, you know too much to stay here. You've seen the basement. You know about the survivors. You understand how the feeding system works. The government will never stop hunting you. I stared at the fake documents, realizing that my old life had ended the moment I'd turned that blue key. What about my family? My cousin Vince? Vince is safer in federal custody than he would be on the outside right now, Patricia said quietly. And your family. Well, they'll be told you died in an industrial accident at the pawn shop. It's better that way. Through the curtained windows, I could see the smoke plume growing larger. Whatever had happened at the pawn shop was getting worse, not better. How long do we have? I asked. Jake checked his watch. Phoenix Protocol initiates at sunset. By tomorrow morning, everyone in this room will be ghosts. New names, new cities, new lives. And the other survivors? The ones who were depending on the pawn shop? That's where you come in, Danny. We need someone who understands the feeding system, someone who can help us establish new collection points in other cities. I looked around the room at faces that carried decades of secrets and pain. These people had been abandoned by their government, experimented on, forgotten, and left to survive on their own. But they'd built something remarkable, a community, a family, a way to preserve their humanity despite everything that had been done to them. When do we leave? The antique shop in Flagstaff, Arizona doesn't look like much from the outside. Dusty windows display vintage cameras and old jewelry, the kind of place tourists pass by without a second glance. But the locals know better. They know that Martinez's Collectibles stays open late, that the owner pays fair prices for unusual items, and that sometimes people bring in things that make the old Geiger counter behind the register start clicking. Daniel Martinez, the name still feels strange on my tongue, has been running this place since spring. The previous owner, Mrs. Chen, no relation to the federal agent who died in Las Vegas, left everything to a distant relative who turned out to be one of Patricia Morrison's carefully crafted legal identities. The setup is different from Jake's operation, but serves the same purpose. Instead of a basement full of contained subjects, I work with survivors who've integrated into Flagstaff's community. Margaret runs the coffee shop on LaRose Street, her 1940s pin curls always perfect, and her skin carrying just enough luminescence to explain why she keeps the lighting dim. Robert teaches mathematics at Northern Arizona University, his ability to exist in multiple time states making him uniquely qualified to explain complex theoretical concepts. They come to my shop when they need feeding, bringing jewelry that glows faintly or watches that stopped working during atomic tests, conducted decades before they were supposedly born. I process their transactions with the same care Jake taught me, storing the radioactive materials in lead-lined containers until pickup day. The Phoenix Protocol worked better than anyone expected. When the Las Vegas survivor community vanished, the government assumed they'd all died in the pawn shop incident. Official reports blamed a gas leak explosion for the building's destruction, though anyone with a dosimeter could tell the real story from the lingering radiation readings. Patricia coordinates our network from somewhere in Montana, using encrypted channels to connect survivor communities across the Southwest. The feeding system has evolved beyond single collection points. Now we have a network of antique shops, vintage stores, and estate sales that serve the same function while appearing completely legitimate to outside observers. News from Nevada comes through unofficial channels. The crater where Jake's pawn shop used to be has been filled with concrete and designated a former industrial site requiring long-term environmental monitoring. The other 11 facilities Patricia mentioned were quietly closed, and their contents transferred to more secure locations, which probably means those subjects met the same fate as the Basement 17. But the free survivors continue living their strange half-lives in cities across America. A network of people who volunteered for atomic testing in good faith and got trapped between human and something else entirely. They work regular jobs, pay taxes, contribute to their communities, and try to forget that they died and came back changed 70 years ago. My cousin Vince got released from federal custody with his charges mysteriously dropped. He thinks I died in an industrial accident, and sometimes I catch him posting memorial messages on social media. It's better this way. Danny Moretti died when Agent Chen breached that basement, and Daniel Martinez was born from the necessity of survival. The bell above my shop door chimes as evening approaches, and Margaret walks in carrying a small jewelry box. Her smile never quite reaches her eyes. None of theirs do. But she's learned to find contentment in this approximation of normal life. The usual donation for the Historical Preservation Fund, she asks, our agreed-upon euphemism for the feeding process. I nod and reach for the lead-lined container, already knowing her pendant will glow softly in the dim light. The Geiger counter begins its familiar clicking as she opens the box, revealing a brooch shaped like a mushroom cloud that pulses with stored atomic energy. Outside, Flagstaff settles into another desert evening, unaware that some of its most productive citizens are living reminders of America's atomic age. They found peace in anonymity, purpose in community, and survival in accepting that some changes can't be undone, only managed. The feeding continues, one transaction at a time.